Sì? Benvenuti a tutti.
Good morning,
Sono Giovanni
everyone.
Alario. Por necesidad del guión voy a hablar en italiano.
My name is
Hablo italiano per
Giovanni.
due ragioni. Uno, per le traduzioni,
I'm
due,
going to
perché
speak in
sono
Italian
italiano,
today, first of
visto
all
che è il tema
because I'm
dell'identità
Italian,
e della relazione.
and
Vi do il
also
benvenuto
because today we're going to talk
da
about
parte mia, che
identity and
sono il responsabile
relationship.
della formazione
I would like to
docenti
welcome you
a
all.
scuola e
I am
membro
the person in
dell'equipe
charge of
dirigente.
education here in the
Anche se
school.
questo è un teatro, non va in scena qualcosa di finto, ma
It
va
is
in
true that
scena
we're
la
here
vita
in a
vera,
theater,
cioè
but
la
we need to
voglia
remember that
che
we're
noi
not here to
abbiamo
act. We're
di
not here to
incontrarci,
put on a
di
movie.
conoscerci
We're here to show
e di
real
stare
life. We
insieme
want to meet one
dopo
another.
tanto
We want to be
tempo
together
difficile.
after such a long
Quindi essere
time,
qui prima di
especially
tutto è
after
già
such
un
a hard
miracolo.
time. It is really a miracle to
Vi
be able to
auguro
be
una
here all
buona
together.
giornata,
Now, with this being
di
said, I wish you
goderci
all a good day of
tutto
work
quello
ahead.
che avremo
I
davanti
hope that we can
e vi
enjoy
lascio
everything
alle
that comes
parole
today.
e
And
al benvenuto
I
della
will now
nostra
give the floor
direttrice
to
pedagogica,
our
Maria
director,
Angeles Quesada.
Maria Angeles Quesada, who will give an introduction to the work today.
Buenos días. Un saludo
Good morning.
rápido para daros la bienvenida.
A very quick good morning and
Luego,
introduction
Giovanni
to welcome you
Marco
all.
harán la introducción
Giovanni and
a las
Marco will
presentaciones
start the introduction
pertinentes.
for today's
Tengo que
presentations.
deciros que para nosotros es una alegría tremenda lo que ocurre aquí hoy.
I want to
Este
tell you
congreso.
that the event that we have organized here today is really a
Os
pleasure
digo
for
que
all
este
of
fin de
us.
semana, cuando escuchaba las noticias,
Over the weekend, when I was listening to the
cuando
news,
escuchaba cómo está la situación
when I was
política,
listening
que
to
se
the
agrava,
political situation that
las
seems to be
repercusiones
getting worse and
sociales,
worse,
económicas
the social
que
and
puede
economic
tener,
repercussions that there could be,
me daba cuenta que este congreso
I
cobraba
truly realized
más
that this
sentido que nunca.
event really has an incredible
Si
meaning.
hay algo que nos apasiona en el Colegio San Ignacio,
Here in the Sant'Ignazio
la
school,
pasión
there is something that
por
really
educar,
accompanies
pero no de
us,
cualquier
and that is
manera.
the passion
Educar
to
desde la
educate.
realidad,
Educate
desde lo que
starting
está
from the
ocurriendo.
reality of what is
Para
happening.
nosotros es importantísimo
This is
acompañaros
something
a cada uno
truly
de
important for
vosotros,
us. We want
alumnos,
to be able to accompany each and every
para
one of you
conoceros a
students
vosotros mismos,
so that you can get to
aprender a
know
relacionaros
yourselves,
con
so that
vosotros
you can
mismos
get to
y así
learn
que
how
sirva de
to relate
trampolín
yourself to one another, to the
para
others,
entender qué pasa
and also to
en
start to
vuestro entorno
understand
más
what is
cercano,
happening in your
pero
surroundings,
también para
what is
entender qué es
happening
lo que
around
ocurre en
you.
otras zonas,
But also you
que
need to
porque
be able to understand
geográficamente
what is
estén
happening
más
in
lejos,
areas
no
geographically far
significa
from where you
que lo
are.
que allí
We
ocurre
need to remember that what is
nos
happening far
toque,
from
nos
us
duela,
is
nos
not
interpele.
necessarily far from our lives.
Este
Many
congreso
times it touches us, it has
es
to
un
do with
espacio
us.
privilegiado
This is
justo
a
para
privileged area, and
para
this is the
hablar,
right place
para
to be
poner
able
en
to talk
común,
about this, to get together,
para ver juntos cómo hacer,
to
porque
be
hay
able to
tantas
see what we can
situaciones
do all
ante
together.
las que no estamos dispuestos a quedarnos con los brazos
There are
cruzados.
many situations in which we cannot just sit
Gracias de
still.
verdad
So
a cada
really,
uno de
thank
los que
you.
habéis
Thank you
trabajado
to each
duro,
and
lo
every one
sé,
of you for
para
your
que este
hard work.
congreso sea posible.
I know that you have worked
Gracias a
very
los que
hard
estáis
to make
aquí,
this event
los que estáis
possible.
conectados.
So thank you to all of you who
Aprovechemos
are
este
here
día al
present,
máximo
and
y
thank you
damos
also to
gracias
those who are
por esta
connected
oportunidad.
online. I want to
Bienvenidos
thank you for
todos.
this opportunity and welcome you all.
Diamo la parola adesso a Fernando Chironda che nos saluta da parte del Comitato TRE Ottobre, uno degli organizzatori.
Now we're going to
di
give the
questa
floor to
giornata.
one of the organizers of the Comitato TRE Ottobre.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone.
Bellissimo vedere questa sala piena.
It is incredible
Abbiamo
to see so many people here.
11 regioni dell'Italia
There are students
rappresentate in
from
questa sala,
11
6
regions
paesi
here,
europei.
6 European
Quando si
countries.
parla di identità, quando si parla dell'arte dell'accoglienza,
When we
quello che è
talk
un po' il
about
tema che ci
identity,
guida
when we
oggi,
talk about the art
questa è
of
un po' la
reception,
risposta,
this is the
in un
answer
certo
that we can
modo.
try to give.
Significa per noi, tutti insieme, questionare da dove prima per conoscere
For
noi
us, this
stessi,
means getting together
per
to
poter, come
understand
dire,
ourselves.
essere anche in grado di relazionarsi con gli
Also
altri.
getting together to be
E
able to
averci
start
tutti
having a
insieme
relationship
in
with
una sala
others
come questa,
and really seeing everyone together in such a beautiful theater, people coming from different parts of Europe, people coming from different parts of Italy, and I come from Italy as
ci
well.
fa capire quanto davvero possiamo
is
fare
really a
molto
way for
insieme.
us to understand that together we can do a lot.
Ha cercato di investire molto
In these years, the
nel
Comitato TRE
fare in modo
Ottobre has
che
really tried to
voi,
invest
giovani
in trying to
ragazzi,
be
le
able
scuole,
to make
i
sure that
professori,
you, young people,
potessimo
students, the
insieme
professors,
lavorare
everyone,
per
to make
creare
sure that we could
ponti,
all
per
work together
connettersi,
to
per
be able to
parlarci
create
tra
a
di noi,
relationship,
per fare in
to
modo
open a
di
dialogue,
conoscerci, appunto.
to get to know one another.
Perché solo così possiamo poi trasmettere questa nostra
This is the only
conoscenza
way in
al
which we
di
can
là, al di
pass
fuori.
on our
Quando si
knowledge
parla
to
di
people who are on the
migrazione spesso,
outside.
no? Si parla sempre di un'identità altrui,
Very
di
often, when
un'altra
we talk about
persona,
migration, we
spesso
talk
appunto
about
fanno i
someone
viaggi
else's
che molto
identity,
spesso
someone who
vediamo nelle
goes through an
televisioni,
incredible
si
journey. We
trasmettono.
see their journey on
Ma
the TV,
poi
on the
c'è quello
news.
spazio di confine che è di relazione, di
But then there's
conoscenza, per
also
superare
a
poi,
different
che ci
aspect,
aiuta
and
poi
that
a
is the
superare
aspect
le
of the
paure
relationship that
che
will
non
allow
vogliamo
us to overcome
affrontare
fear.
perché semplicemente non conosciamo l'altro. Quindi
Very
credo
often
che
we are
questo
afraid
sia un
because we do
po'
not know the other.
ancora una volta
And therefore, I think that being here is really an answer to all of this.
a voi studenti, ma
Now, I want to
anche ai
pass on a
professori
message to you students, and also to the professors who are here today. And that is, let's keep organizing events just like this one. Keep inviting us to your cities. Let's keep calling other students who may be listening to us online, who were not able to come here in presence.
continuiamo a camminare insieme questo
Let's keep walking together.
Quindi grazie mille
Let's keep
davvero
moving forward in this journey. So really, thank you to all the organizers.
questo evento oggi.
Thank you to those who organized today's event.
Marco in particolare anche
Thank you to Marco in particular, but to everyone who made it possible to organize this day, and especially to make it such a beautiful day. So thank you once again, and I wish you a good day ahead.
Grazie Fernando.
Thank you, Fernando.
In altro modo vi accoglie questo paese con una tipica canzone spagnola.
So now, of course, we will begin today's meeting with a very typical Spanish song.
Hola, hola, muy bien. Buenos días.
Good morning.
Nada, voy a cantar para vosotros Pájaros de Barro.
So I'm going to sing a song for you.
Espero que
It is a Spanish song called Pájaros de Barro. I hope you enjoy it.
Por si el tiempo me arrastra a playas desiertas, hoy cierro yo el libro de las horas muertas. Hago pájaros de barro, hago pájaros de barro y los echo a volar. Por si el tiempo me arrastra a playas desiertas, hoy rechazo la bajeza del abandono y la pena, y una página en blanco más. Siento el asombro de un transeúnte solitario. En los mapas me pierdo, por sus hojas navego, ahora sopla el viento. Cuando el mar quedó lejos hace tiempo. Ya no subo la cuesta que me lleva a tu casa. Ya no duerme mi perro junto a tu candela. En los vértices del tiempo anidan los sentimientos. Hoy son pájaros de barro que quieren volar. En los valles me pierdo, en las carreteras duermo. Ahora sopla el viento. Cuando el mar quedó lejos hace tiempo, cuando no tenga barca, remos ni guitarra, cuando ya no canta el ruiseñor de la mañana. Ahora sopla el viento, cuando el mar quedó lejos hace tiempo. En los valles me pierdo, en las carreteras duermo. Gracias.
Sì? Beh, vedendo I ragazzi, Pedro è il nostro professore di matematica.
Pedro is our
Fantastico,
math
grazie,
teacher,
Pedro.
and you were really incredible. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you once
Come vedete,
again.
abbiamo l'arte nel sangue.
As you can see, art is really inside of us, and this is something that we can really do well.
Adesso una che già è qui da un paio di giorni, è diventata nostra
Now I want to
amica,
introduce to you someone who has been with us for a few days. She is the person in charge of the culture for these educational days. Her name is Paola Fraternale Meloni. She is in charge of education also for the Italian ministry. And with this being said, I will give the floor to Paola to introduce today's work.
Allora, buongiorno, benvenuti.
Good morning. Welcome. I know some people are following us from Italy as well. So my name is Paola Fraternale Meloni, as Giovanni already said, and I teach history and philosophy at the school in Pesaro. Pesaro is really an incredible city, a beautiful city in the center of Italy. This is the second session of this very important initiative, and in fact, the first session was in Pesaro on January 10th and 11th. At that time, the pandemic was still really, really bad, but despite this, we were still able to organize the event. So we organized these 2 days in which we met journalists, philosophers, scholars. We planned some lab activities in the afternoon. And during this event, we were able to discuss the topic of migration, identity, and relationship, and we did so with a multidisciplinary approach. Today we're doing the same. The only difference is that we're organizing this in only 1 day instead of 2. But still, we will get the chance to talk and meet to some people who will allow us to truly understand the topic. We want to do this to try to move away from a scholastic approach, and we want to try to come up with new proposals, and we want to really try to reach out to students. Now, as far as Italy is concerned, this initiative was promoted by the Ministry of Education together with the Comitato TRE Ottobre. This is possible thanks to AMIF, the European Fund for Asylum and Migration. And this is something proposed by the Ministry of Interior Affairs. Of course, the Comitato TRE Ottobre provided an important contribution. Fernando spoke before me, but I also want to thank the president of the Comitato, that is Tarek Brane. We see that this is really a synergy of strength of European and Italian schools. It is really something that puts everyone together, because identity really makes us think about something that we can do all together. Today we will listen to some songs, we will listen to some contributions that will allow us to understand the importance of the other. Fernando was talking about the border. The border is where the other is found, where we found someone who may be different. Just like Umberto CURI says, the other is present far from us, but we are only complete when we can really start a relationship with the other. So now I want to give the floor to the coordinator of today's roundtable. This is a teacher of philosophy, and his name is Javier Andeo.
Sì, si sente. Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's event here in Spain. And just like Paula said, this is our second step of this program of work that we're trying to do together. The first step was the event that we organized in the city of Pesaro in Italy. And in that occasion, we had the chance to listen to different people. We listened to people that provided their contributions, and they helped us further analyze and understand this topic that we're really interested in. So, of course, each person spoke from their own perspective, whether that being CAPONNETto, Fernando De Aro, and also we have NELLO SCAVO, who is here with us, connected online. Hi, Nello, can you hear us? Oh, wow, it's hard to hear your voice so many times. Technical problems.
Sono nella caverna. Siccome loro sono giornalisti,
So as I said, these are three journalists, and the way in which they will help us in our work is by providing a very specific contribution. They're going to talk to us about the work in the field. A journalist is a person who goes somewhere to find out the truth. So this is a service that is provided to everyone. Of course, it is something that really helps us. Of course, we are not able to go everywhere, and the journalists allow us to understand the reality in places where we cannot go. In particular, we're talking about three incredible journalists, and for this reason, we decided that it was really worth it to have them here with us today. I am really thankful for their presence. These three journalists have traveled the world to try to understand the phenomenon that we want to try to present to you, that we want to try to further understand and analyze in this event today. In this specific, I'm talking about migration. I'm talking about people who are forced to flee their country. And we want to understand how this migration takes place and how these migrants are welcomed in other countries. So the three journalists will act as a testimony. They will help us understand what is happening. Then, of course, we may ask them to give us their opinion, their point of view. But first of all, we want them to present to us the facts. So we want to know what is happening. So let me introduce them. Here we have Angela Caponnetto. She comes from Sicily. So she feels at home here in Spain. She is a journalist for Rai News 24. She is the author of a book called Through Your Eyes, Chronicles of Migration. And for quite a while, she has been dealing with migrations in the Mediterranean area. She deals with situations of migrants in Senegal, Gambia, and she has also planned a documentary. She has documented what is happening when migrants try to cross the Mediterranean Sea with the help of NGOs, and also what happens when these migrants get to Lampedusa. Now, these are just some of the things that she does, and I think that we can truly understand that her contribution will be incredible. Then we have Nello Scavo, another journalist who unfortunately is not here with us today because of the pandemic. However, we are lucky enough to be able to talk to him because he is connected online. Now, we're trying to understand how we can hear him, but in the meantime, let me tell you that he is a journalist for the Avvenire. He has worked on organized crime, migration, and he has written very many reports on war areas. In 2017, he was able to see firsthand the situation of migrants in a Libyan prison. In 2019, he was the first journalist to go on board of Sea-Watch, and he saw the rescuing of people, and especially he was able to see what happens with human trafficking and arms control. His work has had an important international contribution, and therefore he now has a protection. And lastly, we have someone who has arrived from Spain. His name is Fernando de Haro. He's right here next to me. He is a journalist as well. He works for the radio, also for journalists. He has funded an online journal, and he has also worked on some documentaries on the persecution of Christians in the world. So for this reason, he has been in Egypt, Libya, Syria, Pakistan, and other countries as well. Currently, he is in charge of a program called La Tarde de Cope. So I think we truly understand that these three people are the best people to be able to show us what is happening in the world and to understand how reception truly takes place. So first of all, I have a question for all three of you, because you all have something in common. In fact, you're very passionate about what you do, about your work, about journalism. And also, you all decided to start traveling around the world to be able to see what happens firsthand, to be able to discover the situation of other people. Especially, you decided to start traveling to understand what happens when people have to flee their country and have to go somewhere else. We understand that you're not only trying to collect information, but you try to also defend people's liberties, people's rights. And as far as I know, I think that you have also risked your life. So what you do is not something easy. You're not just working as a journalist from home. So now let me ask you, what pushes you to put all this effort, all this strength into your work, into a work that is so hard and at times also very dangerous? This is my first question for you. Why do you do what you're doing? If you could give us an answer in 5 minutes, 5 or 6, 5 would be better. And Angela, I think you could get started.
So, why do we do what we do? I'm a woman myself, so somebody might think that it's weird to do something that is so dangerous to work on the field. Well, you do it just because this is what journalism is all about. Because you need to be there where things take place. If I can't see what is happening in front of me, it is complicated. So other journalists are maybe in the studios, they work as anchormen, anchorwomen, they report what we do on the field, on the ground. So I decided to do what I do because it's fundamental to me, to see what happens in the world And those who are the protagonists, we are talking about migration here. And since this topic has been interpreted in different ways, it was important to me to tell the stories of people, of their identities. How can I tell the story of a person if I've never met him or her, if I've never got to know her or him, if I never moved out from my country? And I've always been a reporter since I started this job, but everything has become ordinary. My suitcase was always ready, and back in 2013, I decided to go there to follow a certain event. I was at the Concordia. Do you remember that? 33 people died at the Isola del Giglio. In 2013, I wasn't in Lampedusa then. I was there in 2011 during the first Tunisian revolution, and thousands Tunisians arrived there at the Isola del Giglio. In 2013, something happens. So I thought, why 368 people died one step from my house, from my place? Vito was there. He rescued people with his own hands. Right after, from my department, they start to tell what was happening, because that was not the end. After that shipwreck, many people started to arrive from Libya, from Tunisia. Those two countries were just the destination point of people coming from that continent with different identities. So I started to see people arriving to get to know our stories when it was still possible. Now it's not that easy as it was. We're not allowed to get that close to them, to those who land. And what happens there? Well, there is the desire to tell in a better way what was happening, because people arrived there, like arrived already in very bad situations, women and men, with animals with them. Some of them had goats, cats, dogs. How can you face such a journey? The sea, the desert. People who travel kilometers on foot through Syria and through other countries arrive to Libya, crossing the Mediterranean Sea with an animal, with a disabled son or daughter. So I wanted to get on board. I got on a humanitarian boat. But even before that, I got on humanitarian ships, on the marine ships and Guardia di Finanza ships. And we traveled back and forth from Lampedusa. As we got there, we were already back on track. We already had started to travel again, because there was no time, because everything was urgent. And if you consider that from Lampedusa, you have back in 2013 up to 2017, up to the border with Libya, 7 to 10 miles. There was no time to sleep, no time to eat. The cameraman, he had to edit the videos to be delivered as soon as possible. So there was no time, and hundreds people arrived there. Only one day you had 3,000 people on several boats. Many were the injured, wounded people, physically damaged and emotionally damaged, and it doesn't end there. And you, as a reporter, you ask yourself, why is this happening? Very young children with different injuries. They had burns on their bodies. They were on this very bad and old boats, And there is that desire at that point. You start to have a sort of sympathy. You start and be sympathetic with them because you're a human being. You're a woman. I'm not a mother, but I have nephews. And during one of these rescue operations, when I had Marina, this very young child, she was 7 days old. She faced 7 days of sea trip, and you have this, this big motorboat, and everybody starts to jump down the boat. They would have rather died, would rather jump down the boat. You could see the people looking at us, watching our cameras, and they had threatened Sea-Watch. They stop and they turn around and they leave. So we wanted to rescue all of these people, because you, as a journalist, you have to help firsthand. All of these people jump on board, and the mother of this very young child, she didn't have the strength to be there. She had a lot of tension, and when she sees the rescue boat, she dies off, like she didn't have the strength to do anything. And she gives me this 7-day-old baby on a very dangerous boat. What is pushing me? What is pushing a mother to face such a trip, to face such a journey? I go to Africa. I decide to go there, and I really understand, because I don't want to linger that much on this because it would be too long, but to make it short, either you talk about stories when you see them firsthand, or you do something different, but you don't work as a journalist. Thank you very much, Angela, for your words. Then you're gonna tell us something more, but now I want to give the floor to Fernando. Why do you do this job? It is a pleasure to be here with you, this meeting. Good morning. And I'm sorry because I don't speak Italian. I'm sorry about that. To answer your question, I have the same experience. I share the same experience as Angela. I traveled the world because I thought that, there was a need to tell what was happening, to be there, to see what was happening. Otherwise, there is no real journalism in such a moment, even more with the digital world that is, it's such an important thing. Everything looks easier because apparently we are all connected, but that's not the truth. You need to be there, to listen to them, to look at them in the eyes. This is the first thing. Journalism is a practice of thinking. You need to try and understand all of the different nuances, all of the different factors. This is the first reason. I need to understand what is happening, because this is my world. And this was the first reason for which I do what I do. But then there is something more, because this is just the beginning, something more abstract, you know? It is true, but it's something abstract. But then you reach that point when this hypothetical issue, this hypothetical question that you pose to yourself becomes real, because you find other people, other stories, other particular stories, names, people. And I remember, in May, it was the beach at the border between Morocco and Spain, because the Ceuta is a Spanish city that is at the border with Africa. And in March, thousands arrived, and I was there. I was running a program, and I see that the militaries, there were some soldiers there, and they had to send a Moroccan back to his own country. So you have the situation, this border in between, and this young man, he started to grab the leg of this military man and started to cry. And you have to explain what is happening, and you have no other words to explain what is happening. This man, after this long journey, is crying, and I can feel him. I really can. I start to walk in his shoes. I start to walk in his shoes, and I think, what would have I done if I'd been him? So I start to be sympathetic. I start to feel his energy. And I also went to Iraq, in Daesh. Do you remember what happened there? All of those small villages in Mosul, they were evacuated, and some of them were refugees, and they had to leave their country. They had to go to Kurdistan side. There was this guy, this young man, Marvin. His house had been destroyed because you had different military forces from different countries there. And he went to the cemetery and he told me his story. The story, and is also the legacy of his grandfather. And this man, this young man, at the end of the day, he's become to me, I'll never forget about him, about what he said to me, or what we lived together during those days. I don't know how to explain this, but he's a friend to me, he's a brother to me. Also, I was in India. I made a documentary there. You have a very strong and violent Hinduism there, similar to jihadism, but in a different way. You have a very stratified class system, and there is a very poor class. And I spent a couple of days with a nun who had to move to another city because she suffered from violence, sexual violence, which she used as a weapon. After talking to this nun, after she told me about what she suffered, this terrible sexual violence, so she was a sister to me. I will never see it again. I will never see her again in my life, but I will always remember about her. I remember in Turkey, at the border with Greece, there were the Afghans, a family, just like your family. They were there. They were sleeping. They didn't have a place to stay. They were making a bonfire. And this family, I'll never forget it. So, just to conclude, at the beginning, there was a desire to really understand the world, but then the relationship with people who, at the end of the day, become brothers and sisters to you. So many people who have met across several countries, they're still with me. They're part of my life, which is why I feel lucky. Thank you, Fernando. So if I may add something more, this helps us better understand to others such a complex phenomenon, because when you meet different people, you have different explanations of the reason why they had to leave. Maybe somebody left because they had to study. Somebody left because they were suffering from violence, and you have to meet them in order to explain to others what is happening. So let's move to Italy now. Nello, how you doing? So same question. What is pushing you to do your job? Before answering, I want to thank everybody also for your patience, because due to some pandemic-related issues, I can't be there with you right now. I was dreaming of being there with you at this wonderful event, which is why I apologize. It's not easy to speak right after Fernanda and Angelo, whom I appreciate very much. For me, journalism is a practice of, thinking, but also vanity, because I want to reach places and tell stories, but also I think, why would even readers be interested in reading my stories? So vanity is also related to our job. But you need to face the reality every time. You're always confronted with reality. It's also, to use a metaphor, it's like a disease. You have to go there and tell their stories. When I meet people, I feel a responsibility, because no human beings I've ever met over this 30 years of experience on the field wanted to be told to the world like a person who had nothing, who lost hope, who doesn't have food to feed their children. who doesn't know how to live his life. So nobody I've ever met during these years wanted to be told, wanted to be described as one of the poorest on the earth. But when these people accept to be told in such a way, accepting the challenge, taking the challenge, there is also a sort of humiliation to be described not as a successful person, not as a powerful man or as a powerful woman who's living the dream, but who has nothing to say but bad things, As a journalist, you have a legacy. It's a sort of spiritual legacy that you have to tell people, to be told for what you are, for your pain, for the dramas that you live every day, that are also universal drama. And you have to represent their voices, their pain, because those who live for a reason, they do it for a reason, they want to live a better life. On the other side, you have the duty to also tell about the organized systems that really impact negatively their lives. So it is not enough to tell about the rescue operations in a sea. It is not enough to tell why a single person needs to leave, but rather you need to understand why all of them are leaving. I've also been to Spain recently. I've been to Canary Islands, to Fuerteventura, to deal about this very bad and critical situation in Europe, right in Europe, because you might think that all of these stories are relegated to Africa, but that's not the truth. Some of these people, maybe in Honduras, after traveling the sea, they are found dead. But you need to think, who's taking advantage of this? Who's benefiting from this big humanitarian crisis? You need to understand the dynamics of fear, the weapons that are used, because some are becoming rich. Criminals are getting richer and richer. And all of this is being corroborated also at a political level, because without the political word, this wouldn't be possible. And you need to consider the big challenge of borders, of walls. You need to destroy walls, but this is not happening at the moment. But in Europe, from now to 2026, about roughly 21 million euros have been allocated to the construction of walls, and an important Spanish company is involved, and this is unbelievable. So we pay weapon producer to fight faraway countries, but this conflict creates refugees, and we need to protect our border. It doesn't make sense. All of this doesn't make sense. This is a vicious circle, and we need to put an end to this vicious circle. So the story of each individual is not the story of that person only, but through their stories we tell what is happening at a universal level. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nello.
Quindi, come abbiamo sentito, una delle cose più belle di quello che dite è che
So as we just heard, one of the most beautiful things that you said, and also one of the most interesting things from a philosophical point of view, is that a specific story can become a testimony of a universal story. So with this being said, I would like to ask you for a very brief example. I ask you to be brief so that we can leave some time for possible questions. And I want to take advantage of this moment to remind you that in the dossier that we gave you, there is a WhatsApp phone number. So if you have any questions, feel free to send them to this WhatsApp number. And as soon as I receive the questions, I will choose among all the questions to ask the journalists. So if you have any questions, just send a message to the WhatsApp number, whether you're here in the room or you're connected online. So with this being said, as I was saying, I would like to please ask you to provide a brief, concrete example related to reception. So like you said, Angela, your work has to do with never stopping at the single word, trying to go beyond the word migrant, trying to understand who is behind those names. I was very impressed with Angela's book, and in fact, the names of the chapters are the names of the people that she spoke to. So she really put a face to these names. And now, this is why I would like to ask you to please tell us a testimony, a story of what you think of when you hear the names of these people, who you think of. Okay, let me give you one example, because if not, I would have too many examples to give you. First of all, I want to say that reception means receiving. I receive, I welcome someone without trying to change their identity. This means welcoming someone and accepting them for who they are without trying to change them. All we need to do is we need to try to support this person who may need specific help in a specific moment. Now, I just want to bring to you the story of Yusuf. As I said, I have many stories that I could tell you, many stories of children, unaccompanied minors. But I'm going to tell you of Yusuf, a child. And this is just an example to tell you about all those minors who get to us with no parents, no relatives. So there are many children who get to Italy, they are put on a boat, and actually these children did not want to come to Italy. So in particular, Yusuf, he was put on a boat, he wanted to work in Libya, and he really did not want to come to Italy. I could say it's similar to my story. I'm from Sicily, but I work in Rome. So after a few years, Yusuf asked his owner to please give him some money. And the owner said, no, I will not give you any money. All I can do is I can put you on a boat and send you to Europe. And Yusuf was saying, but I don't know anyone in Europe. I do not want to go there. So to make things short, he was really drugged. They gave him a coffee or maybe a cup of tea, and they put something in that tea, and he pretty much fell asleep, and he was put in a boat with other young people just like him. So at some point he woke up and he was in the middle of the sea on a boat that was rescued by a humanitarian boat. I think that was my first trip on a humanitarian boat. And just like Fernando was saying, Yusuf started telling me his story. We spent 1, 2, 4 days a week together. So he started telling me his story. He started telling me that he would like to become a doctor. And I already knew that once he would get to Italy, he would not be welcomed like he was expecting to. I already knew that he would be put in a center. This happened in 2017, so it occurred at a moment in which there were many migrants that were arriving to Italy. We were in a situation of crisis, let's say, crisis of migration. And so when Yusuf got to Italy, he gave me a piece of paper saying, this is my name, please find me on Messenger. Of course, I found him. I sent him a message on Messenger. I saw him get on a bus. And after 1 week, he told me he was sent to the city of Turin, that is in the upper north of Italy, while he had arrived in the south. So in Turin, he was put in a center that was supposed to be a reception center, but in reality, it was not. This was a center managed by people from Calabria. In particular, these people were from the mafia there in Calabria called 'Ndrangheta. And they were not using the funds for the support for minors. Technically, when you're working with minors, you need to provide a psychologist, a lawyer, you need to allow them to go to school, while in this center, nothing was happening. Now, I'm going to make it very short, but this is really a beautiful story. But after talking to some people, I was able to put Yusuf in contact with another association in the city of Turin. And this association was able to get Yusuf, and he left the center. Actually, the center also shut down. So what I'm trying to say is that we cannot expect people to get to our country and then not provide any support, especially when we're talking about young children, children who feel lost, they are alone. We need to truly welcome them. Nowadays, Yusuf got his driving license, he studied, he's working, yet since 2017, he is still waiting to be given a confirmation for his request for asylum. So still, since 2017, he has not received this. He does not have a regular residence permit. And now his last hope is that they will approve it. Really, we're talking about a person who went through incredible things. For me, he's like a nephew. I feel like I'm almost his mother. He also came to my home. He came to visit me. I visited him in Turin. We cooked together. I cooked for him food from Sicily. He cooked for me typical food from his country, that is the Ivory Coast. And really, we were able to exchange identities. He's Muslim, I'm Catholic. And yet we're still able to pray together. We pray to the same God in the end, no matter what we call the God. Now Yusuf called me and he said, I cannot do this anymore. I am still waiting to get an answer. I cannot take it anymore. I really hope that I can receive a final yes, a final positive answer. But in the meantime, he still lost his residence permit. So again, for a while, he will not be able to work. Luckily, the place where he works is very understanding, so they're just waiting for him to go back with a residence permit. But he told me, I cannot take this anymore. What did I do? I want to become part of your country, but it does not seem possible. So now I have a question for Italian politicians. What do we want? Do we want to make sure that migration becomes safe? Then we need to make it safe. We need to make sure that our territory, our land, is a land that gives opportunities, protection. Thank you, Angela.
Adesso Fernando.
Sì, io racconto rapidamente una piccola storia.
I will also share with you a brief story that helped me understand that when we talk about reception, we're not talking about a moral duty. When we talk about reception, we're talking about identity. We're talking about being yourself. I've been in Syria, and in the north of Syria, there's a city called Aleppo. When I got there, the sun was rising. And let me tell you that this city is completely destroyed. I'm sure you've seen pictures from World War II. Well, the situation in that city in Syria is the same. Everything is destroyed. It's insane. There has been a conflict between people in the city, so we could really talk about a civil war. Now, the goal for the government was to create an identity of conflict, not only with Christians, but also with other Muslims. They were trying to say that some Muslims do not really believe in God. So getting to that city, I was able to see that the city was completely destroyed, the architecture was destroyed, but also the identity was destroyed because there was so much conflict.
perseguitati dagli Identità.
So when I got there, I saw some people who had been persecuted, and these people were trying to prepare food for other Muslims. And when I arrived, someone said, well, maybe someone waiting for food is actually someone who is trying to cause conflict. So I immediately asked, well, then why are you giving them food? And the answer I received was, well, without the other, and of course in this case we're not talking about someone who comes from abroad, but someone who simply has a different identity. So this person told me, without the other, I cannot be myself. Now the city was completely destroyed, there was no food. It was a city in which you could hear bombing. It was really a city at war. So I started talking to them, to the people who were cooking. This was a group of Christians. And what they told me is, well, if we do not have a relationship with the others, we cannot be ourselves. We need to remember that these people are here to allow us to understand who we truly are. I remember there was a Catholic friar who was saying, well, if there is no relationship with the Muslim, then it is not possible for me to truly understand who Jesus is. In that moment, I understood that, first of all, these people were not afraid. In Europe, there is a lot of fear. We're always afraid of everything and everyone. We are insanely afraid, we could say. We feel like someone who is not like us is going to threaten us. Differently, in Syria, they were not afraid because their identity was so strong that they were not threatened by the other. When there is a strong identity, you're able to fight so that the other can teach you something, can strengthen your identity. Those who are afraid have a very weak identity. And in Syria, I found a very strong identity. This is why they needed the other. They needed the other to be themselves. So I think our problem is that we have a very weak identity, and this is why we are afraid of the other.
Grazie Fernando. Nello, un esempio di cosa...
Thank you, Fernando. Nello, could you give us an example of what you think it means to talk about reception?
Esempi belli. A me vengono in mente, per non aggiungere insomma storie anche drammatiche come quelle ascoltate prima, anche storie invece di speranza.
Now, I'm not going to share with you a dramatic story just like we just listened to. I want to share with you a story of hope. Very often, reception is something that happens spontaneously, not organized, not structured. Very often, I have found testimonies of reception where I would never have imagined to find some. Very often we want to focus on hopeless stories, testimonies. We seem to focus on a type of journalism that is really useless in the end. I am thinking about the right of the Balkans after the Syrian war in 2011. A woman in a village called Veles was able to pass through Skopje, the capital city in Macedonia. This woman really was living on the train tracks in the north of the country. In 2011, she was living there and she saw some refugees arrive. Now, I'm sure you know that very often refugees decide to walk around along the track lines because this is a way not to get lost. Now, when this woman saw these people arrive, at first she was afraid. She did not understand who was really arriving, who these people were. And then at the end, she realized that what she was seeing on CNN, what she was seeing on the news, what she was reading of, and everything that she was hearing about related to cities destroyed, cities in Syria that were being completely destroyed. She understood that she was seeing firsthand what was really happening in Syria. She saw that these people were coming from Syria, and she decided to welcome them. She understood that the people that were coming through that country, that city, needed support. And therefore, she started organizing this informal reception for the people that were going through a transit country. Now, I'm sure you know that the Balkan route is still full of migrants, and since 2011, they have been able to welcome over 25,000 people in a very informal way. Informal in the sense that the person that prepared bread started preparing more bread because he knew that more people would arrive. So everyone did what they could. Everyone contributed in the way that they knew how to. This means reception. Reception means being able to put yourself out there. I agree when Fernando said that a strong identity is not afraid of the other. I'm from Sicily, just like Angela, and our DNA is full of different identities, and I think that this has really created our identity. It has created who we are, also from a religious point of view.
L'accoglienza è stata colpita in questi anni perché se colpisci l'accoglienza
reception has been threatened in the past few years, and when this happens, we completely lose humanity in our societies. What happens when we threaten reception is we create an environment of fear. In a moment of economic crisis, it was very easy to convince a large part of the public opinion that it is not possible to spend 30 euros a day to welcome people because the Italian people are already undergoing an economic crisis. It is very easy to convince people that migrants come to our country just because they want to lose our jobs, they want to create uncertainty. We have been listening to this in the past few years everywhere. It has been very easy to convince citizens that complex problems are threatening our lives. And using Twitter, it's very easy to convince people of something that is not true. I always say that when a person who has some complex questions meets a politician who has Twitter, then the person who has complex questions will completely be lost because Twitter seems to be stronger than anything else. So I think that when we talk about reception, we're not only saying that we need to be willing to accept everyone. This is not what we mean. Like Angela said, I think we need some safe routes. At the same time, I also think we need to ask ourselves a question. So, for example, what is happening in Libya, in the prisons, we could call them in Libya, is it something that affects us or not? We need to see who is funding these prisons, and we need to ask ourselves, does this have to do with us or no? So I think that before talking about reception, we need to focus on the fundamental human rights. We have been seeing fundamental human rights incredibly threatened in the past few years. For example, what happened at the border between Belarus, Poland, what happens on the Balkan routes, also what happens in Greece, people being pushed away from Turkey, so many people who die at sea, sexual violation, all of this happens with the money that we seem to be providing. So if we close our eyes in front of these realities, can we still keep talking about human rights? I think this is a huge question, and it is something that we journalists are trying to do. We're trying to put together our effort. We're trying to work together. There is an international team of colleagues who are working together. As Fernando said, when you meet someone, you need to remember that that is a person. That is not a chance for you to win over that person. So I think we need to be able to provide common answers, and even though this is hard, it is pivotal. I think that we are starting to see some results. In fact, in the past few months, we have been able to understand that there are many fake news that are not really that strong anymore. So I am pretty optimistic. Thank you. Thank you, Nello.
Quindi partiamo con delle domande.
Okay, now we can start with some questions. I've started receiving questions, so as I already told you, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to the WhatsApp number. So, Fernando, I have a question for you related to what you were saying. You were talking about a weak versus a strong identity. So, Luca from the city of Latina is saying it is right to say that we need to welcome the other, but why are we so afraid of losing our roots? You were saying that the other is not the problem, the other simply shows me my problem. So you were rightly saying that this fear of welcoming shows that we have a weak identity. Now, can you explain this a bit more, and especially how can we create a community that has such a strong identity that is able to welcome everyone? Well, I think that the person asking this question should live a concrete experience. It is not enough to only talk about things. We need to truly see what is happening. We know that there is a lot of talk about identity. So my suggestion would be for you to experience what happens in your life when you have a relationship with someone who is different, when you have a relationship with the other. So ask yourself in that situation if you feel threatened by the presence of the other, or if in the presence of the other you feel better, you are more convinced about what you believe in. So I think that the key thing is that there needs to be a first-hand experience. We need to see what is happening. We seem to think about our identity as something very abstract. Very often you may say, okay, I'm white, I believe this, I believe that. So it is an identity that you think about more than you really experience. Now, when you find yourself having a relationship with the other, you're truly able to understand if your identity is strong, if your identity is real and mature. If you confront yourself with the other, you're able to understand if your identity is real, if it is true. Because again, identity is not something abstract. It has to do with relationships. It has to do with history. So, for example, when talking about religion, when talking about national topics, you may have a lot of things in your head, you may think this and that, but then in the end, when you find yourself confronting with someone else, your identity may be threatened. So you need to understand if you are able to confront yourself with others without losing your identity. If you're not able to keep your identity, then your identity is dead. If you start thinking that you need to preserve your identity no matter what, then your identity will never be there. Identity is not something that you need to think of. Identity is something that you experience when you talk to others, when you meet others. Identity is developed in time, in history. So the starting point is we must not think we need to preserve European identity, because this goes against European principles. Our European history tells us that we always need to learn from the other. Very often we say the Roman tradition, we talk about this and that. But let's remember, the Roman tradition has always been a history of civilization, a history that has grown in time. So if you think, oh, I need to keep my identity as it is, I need to keep the historical identity, well, this is completely against European principles. So now to wrap up, I want to say that it is important to live a first-hand experience and to understand what happens to you when you find yourself having a relationship with the other. Thank you, Fernando.
Tanti spunti qua da riflettere.
So much food for thought in what you said. So one question to you, Angela, from Liana and Giulia from Siena, were asking, how and why did the relationship with the journalists has changed when we say that it's not easy to collect the stories from migrants and other people? It is a very tough point indeed. Starting from 2017 on, there was a very strong migration wave, and from that point, fear was triggered. The fear of invasion, a very misused word, a very misused concept. And from that point, from that moment on, there was a new dynamic for journalists. Before we had the permission to get into the reception center in Italy and in Spain, starting from 2017, 2008, 2019, this sort of, also pandemic-related issue with getting into reception center, this has increased, and the migrants were taken to quarantine boats far from the eyes of the world. The identity of people has become a sort of a shape that we could see from afar, and we could just try and see what was happening. It has become more and more complicated to get in and to report what was happening. Despite all technology, it is not easy to tell what is happening. Let's say Libya, through WhatsApp and social media, we might have the possibility to report what is happening, but still we don't have human touch that is fundamental to create a relationship and to get as much data and information as possible. This was caused by fear. And journalists, just like us, were 365 days a year in specific places where these things were happening, we realized that it was not possible. That it was better not to show them. But we are fighting with NELLO as well for the right to be there. We are waiting for the pandemic to end, to get back in those places. We also spoke to those who, to the military forces, NGOs, but this silence is bad. Why shouldn't we talk about these issues? We are fighting, but still there is a sort of prohibition in showing uncomfortable images, and migrations are becoming more and more, like something, a sort of trivial thing, and physical and human touch is getting lost. We can only see them where they are in, train stations, in our urban centers, trying to survive, or when they're trying to move to another city. And that's not something that should happen. And we thank you again for your dedication and for what you do every day. Now, one question for you, Nello, because you mentioned the media field that is, you're quite savvy in this area. A question from Federico Lampedusa. He says, the use of motto and catchphrases, are this the reason why we are creating very easy and cheesy narratives sometimes? Well, I think Federico there from Lampedusa are very passionate about what we do. This island has also been used negatively over time by the politics in general. But I want to answer this question because the media has been defined as the most powerful destruction weapon, mass destruction weapon, and it creates a barrier between us and them. Let's give an example here. Some fake news that were built and produced in Lampedusa a couple of years ago, and with Angela we contribute to debunking. A lady in Lampedusa reported to some Italian journalists, 3 of them. There was also Casa Pound journal in Italy, the far-right Italian movement that was involved in this, and other Italian journals that are quite famous in our country. I don't want to mention them because I don't want to give some sort of publicity to these people. So this lady said that some migrants had escaped at night from the reception center and killed the dogs of this lady, you know? And this builds somehow a barrier between us and them. Because how can you even think about integrating or including people who are that far from us to the point that kill and eat dogs, an animal that is so dear to us? But this news was fake. But it circulated. It was so common in the media, and you know, people couldn't distinguish between the truth and those fake news. So somebody think that migrants are also thieves and eat dogs, and this create barriers. So all of this just to give you an example. And speaking of identity, I wanted to say something. It happened to me along the Balkan route. During a period, the Hungarian president, Orban, kept on repeating that he closed the border not because of a dehumanization issue, but because he had to protect the Hungarian Christian identity from the Slavic invasion. So I traveled with these people. We started from Macedonia through Serbia up to Hungary, and there was a rejection attempt. These people managed to cross the Hungarian border, but what's peculiar here is that when we were received, when we got close to a border, a Christian border, those people said, okay, let's be careful because the surrounding area, there won't be mosques, there will be many camps and many Christian symbols. So they were approaching to an apparently hostile land. All of these people were either Christian or Muslim, and they were afraid of getting in that area because they thought they would be rejected. So you can understand how identity is used politically in a negative way in order to fuel fear and at the same time to deprive us from the possibility to even imagine a more inclusive society. And I don't want to make any distinction between Christians and non-Christians, but how good would it be for us to receive other types of Christians and hear from them how they live, how they are persecuted in those areas. So, as we said earlier, the truth is that our identity is now weak. Our identity is now afraid of Christians themselves. So thank you, Nello. Thank you. So there will be so much to say, but we need to end this session and we need to continue because the journey is still very long, a long way to go. So I want to thank you. Thanks for your availability, for being with us today, for helping us through our journey, and for your job and dedication. So and I want to thank you. Thanks for what you do with the youth, because the youth will be walking with our legs, with our legacy, and they will have to work because there's so much to do, which is why we thank you for inviting us. So thank you.
Ciao, grazie a tutti.
Ciao Nello.
Ciao, a presto.
Quindi mentre
So I want to share the plan of the day. We could discuss a lot what we talked about, but there was a central point here: the importance of relationship. Identity is not something theoretical and abstract, is a concrete experience. It's something that you experience, you know? Concretely, the image that Angela mentioned, her friend cooking, different type of cuisines, Sicilian, Côte d'Ivoire cuisine, and what we are going to see now is so much related to this. We have prepared a show on Don Quixote, whom I think you know, of course, both the story and the man. This is part of our legacy, of our identity. They're going to read it, and they chose they chose a short text, a short excerpt that talks about our man, Don Quixote. When he talks to Sancho Panza, and he says, "My desire is that he eats from my plate and that he drinks from my cup, because when you share, you are just the same." And we are going to hear a song wrote by Italian songwriter Guccini and interpreted by Pesaro high school students. And you will find the translations of these songs. You can find the translation right in the dossier. Thank you very much. So interpretation won't be provided right now.
Capítulo 11. De lo que le sucedió a Don Quijote con unos cabreros. Deseosos de buscar dónde alojar aquella noche, acabaron con mucha brevedad su pobre y seca comida. Subieron luego a caballo y diéronse priesa por llegar a poblado antes que anocheciese. Pero faltóles el sol y la esperanza de alcanzar lo que deseaban, junto a unas chozas de unos cabreros, y así determinaron de pasarla allí, que cuanto fue de pesadumbre para Sancho no llegar a poblado, fue de contento para su amo dormirla al cielo descubierto, por parecerle que cada vez que esto le sucedía era hacer un acto posesivo que facilitaba la prueba de su caballería.
Fue recogido de los cabreros con buen ánimo y, habiendo Sancho lo mejor que pudo, acomodado a Rocinante y a su jumento, se fue tras el olor que despedían de sí ciertos tasajos de cabra que hirviendo al fuego en un caldero estaban. Y, aunque él quisiera en aquel mismo punto ver si estaban en sazón de trasladarlos del caldero al estómago, lo dejó de hacer, porque los cabreros los quitaron del fuego. Y, tendiendo por el suelo unas pieles de ovejas, aderezaron con mucha priesa su rústica mesa y convidaron a los dos, con muestras de muy buena voluntad, con lo que tenían. Sentáronse a la redonda de las pieles 6 de ellos, que eran los que en la majada había, habiendo primero con groseras ceremonias rogado a Don Quijote que se sentase sobre un dornajo que vuelto del revés le pusieron. Sentóse Don Quijote y quedábase Sancho en pie para servirle la copa, que era hecha de cuerno. Viéndole en pie, su amo le dijo:
Porque veas, Sancho, el bien que en sí encierra la andante caballería, y cuán a pique están los que en cualquiera ministerio de ella se ejercitan, de venir brevemente a ser honrados y estimados del mundo. Quiero que aquí a mi lado y en compañía de esta buena gente te sientes y seas una misma cosa conmigo, que soy tu amo y natural señor, que comas en mi plato y bebas por donde yo bebiere, porque de la caballería andante se puede decir lo mismo que del amor se dice. Que todas las cosas iguala.
Después que Don Quijote hubo bien satisfecho su estómago, tomó un puño de bellotas en la mano y, mirándolas atentamente, soltó la voz a semejantes razones. Dichosa edad y siglos dichosos, aquellos a quien los antiguos pusieron nombre de dorados. Y no porque en ellos el oro, que en esta, nuestra edad de hierro, tanto se estima, se alcanzase en aquella aventurosa sin fatiga alguna, sino porque entonces los que en ella vivían ignoraban estas dos palabras, de tuyo y mío. Eran en aquella santa edad todas las cosas comunes. A nadie le era necesario, para alcanzar su ordinario sustento, tomar otro trabajo que alzar la mano y alcanzarle de las robustas encinas que liberalmente les estaban convidando con su dulce y sazonado fruto.
Las claras fuentes y corrientes ríos, en magnífica abundancia, sabrosas y transparentes aguas les ofrecían. En las quiebras de las peñas y en lo hueco de los árboles formaba su república las solícitas y discretas abejas, ofreciendo a cualquiera mano, sin interés alguno, la fértil cosecha de su dulcísimo trabajo. Los valientes alcornoques despedían de sí, sin otro artificio que el de su cortesía, sus anchas y livianas cortezas, con que se comenzaron a cubrir las casas sobre rústicas estacas sustentadas, no más que para la defensa de las inclemencias del cielo. Todo era paz entonces. Todo amistad. Todo concordia.
Ho letto millanta storie di cavalieri erranti, di imprese, di vittorie, dei giusti sui prepotenti, per starmene ancora chiuso coi miei libri in questa stanza, come un vigliacco ozioso, sordo ad ogni sofferenza. Nel mondo oggi più di ieri domina l'ingiustizia, ma di eroici cavalieri non abbiamo più notizia. Proprio per questo Sancio c'è bisogno soprattutto di uno slancio generoso, fosse anche un sogno matto. Vammi a prendere la sella, che il mio impegno è ardimentoso. L'ho promesso alla mia bella Dulcinea del Toboso, e a te Sancio io prometto che guadagnerà un castello, ma un rifiuto non lo accetto. Forza, sellami il cavallo, tu sarai il mio scudiero, la mia ombra confortante, e con questo cuore puro, col mio scudo ronzinante, porterò con la mia lancia l'ingiustizia giorno e notte, come è vero nella mancia che mi chiamo Don Chisciotte.
Questo folle non sta bene, ha bisogno di un dottore, contraddirlo non conviene, non è mai di buon umore, è la più triste figura che sia apparsa sulla terra, cavalier senza paura di una solitaria guerra, cominciata per amore di una donna conosciuta, dentro a una locanda ore dove fa la prostituta, ma credendo di aver visto una vera principessa, lo ha voluto ad ogni costo farle quella sua promessa, e così da giorni abbiamo solo calci nel sedere, non sappiamo dove siamo, senza pane e senza bere, e questo pazzo scatenato che è il più ingenuo dei bambini, proprio ieri si è stroncato fra le pale dei mulini, è un testardo, un idealista, troppi sogni nel cervello, io che sono più realista mi accontento di un castello, mi farà governatore, avrò terre in abbondanza, quanto è vero che anche ho un cuore e che mi chiamo Sancio Panza.
Salta in piedi Sancio e tardi, non vorrai dormire ancora, solo i cinici e i codardi non si svegliano all'aurora, per i primi indifferenza e disprezzo dei valori, e per gli altri riluttanza nei confronti dei doveri. L'ingiustizia non è il solo male che divora il mondo, anche l'animo dell'uomo ha toccato spesso il fondo, ma dobbiamo fare presto perché più che il tempo passa il nemico si fa d'ombre e si garbuglia la matassa.
A proposito di questo, farsi d'ombra delle cose, l'altro giorno quando ha visto quelle pecore indifese, le attaccate come fossero un esercito di mori, ma da che ne ci mordessero, oltre i cani anche i pastori, era chiaro come il giorno, non è vero mio signore, io sarò un codardo e dormo, ma non sono un traditore, credo solo in quel che vedo e la realtà per me rimane il solo metro che possiedo, com'è vero che ora ho fame.
Sancio, ascoltami ti prego, sono stato anche un realista, ma ormai oggi me ne prego, e anche se è una buona vista, l'apparenza delle cose, come vedi, non mi inganna. Preferisco le sorprese di quest'anima tiranna, che trasforma coi suoi trucchi la realtà che hai lì davanti, che ti apre nuovi occhi e ti accendi sentimenti. Prima d'oggi mi annoiavo e volevo anche morire, ma ora sono un uomo nuovo che non teme di soffrire.
Mio signore, io purtroppo sono un povero ignorante e del suo discorso astratto ci ho capito poco o niente, ma anche ammesso che il coraggio mi cancelli la pigrizia, riusciremo noi da soli a riportare la giustizia in un mondo dove il male è di casa e ha vinto sempre, dove regna il capitale oggi più spietatamente. Riuscirà con questo brocco e questo inutile scudiero al potere dare scacco e salvare il mondo intero.
Mi puoi dire, caro Sancho, che dovrei tirarmi indietro, perché il male ed il potere hanno un aspetto così tetro. Dovrei anche rinunciare ad un po' di dignità, farmi umile e accettare che sia questa la realtà.
Il potere è l'immondizia della storia degli umani, e anche se siamo soltanto due romantici rottami, sputeremo il cuore in faccia all'ingiustizia giorno e notte. Siamo migranti della Mancia, Sancho Panza. Grazie.
Sorry. Thank you. ¿Hay que volverla a poner? Amazing. Amazing.
Un onore e un
It is an honor and a pleasure. I introduce you to one of the most important Italian philosophers, and to me is also a dear friend of mine, Professor Roberto CURI, emeritus professor at Padova University, visiting professor in Los Angeles, Boston, lecturer in different Italian and American universities, and author of more than 40 books. He's an expert in various topics, among which the connection between politics and war, and other very relevant topics that are so important in philosophy: love, death, destiny, pain, time. And I must say that there has been a recent publication for Il Mulino that is called The Death of Time. Also, I want to say that Professor CURI deals with the issue of time through the analysis of an image, of an icon, that is your icon at the Prado, and is the painting, Goya's painting, Saturn, that it's his own children. And now I want to give the floor to Professor Umberto CURI, my thank, and when you'll give it back to me, you will have to turn off your microphone. So, Professor Umberto CURI, the floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, to you, colleagues, students, who are participating in this wonderful initiative. And I want to thank you for your invitation. Participate in this great event, both in Pesaro, in what we did in Pesaro, and what you are doing now in Madrid. And I'm sorry for not being there, but I'm sure that there will be the possibility in the future to meet all together, to facilitate, to the understanding of what I'm going to say. I will give you a short list, a summary of the topics I'm going to deal with. I will start from the distinction between economic migrants and asylum seekers. I will also focus on the reconstruction of the historical genesis of such distinction. Again, asylum seekers and economic migrants. Third, I will mention the relationship between the migration phenomenon and the distribution of resources at the global level. And I will conclude with the relationship between equity in the distribution of resources and the maintenance of peace in the world. I will start off with the first topic. Over the last years, the distinction between economic migrants and refugees or asylum seekers has been object of a very much heated discussion. This distinction is used to justify, to legitimize the expulsion and rejection from the national territory of those migrants who are not entitled to the status of refugees. And I want to stress a very important concept. Such a distinction is part of the so-called hotspot approach that was approved by European EU countries in 2005. Despite it implemented into a real regulation, it puts the basis for the introduction of a new concept by which policy forces can reject migrants, undesired migrants, because they do not match the feature of asylum seekers. In other words, such a distinction has become part of our heritage, of our, of our way of thinking, and is shared by those who work in the field of migration. But I think that we might also state that the policies and politics of European countries on the topic of migration was built on the distinction between economic migrants and asylum seekers. Such a distinction, and I want to make this clear from the very beginning, is also shared by those who might also be favorable in terms of inclusive policies, despite the fact that they keep sharing such a view. So I want to do something with you. Let's build together the historical genesis, the conceptual genesis of such a distinction, in order to better understand whether it can work as the basis of integration policies or rejection of migrants. You will see that the reconstruction of historical and conceptual genesis of such a distinction will be necessary, will be pivotal to understand most of the issues that are related to migration. In the spring of 1948, right after World War II, in Australia, coming from Budapest, Hungary, a young man arrives, whose name you should always remember, Aaron Kunz, who had to leave his own origin country because of the communist golpe. Kunz decided to go to a specific place in Australia, and he had the possibility to complete his studies in sociology and demography and to obtain his master's degree, his PhD, and he became professor at the Canberra University. In 1973, Kunz published an essay that would consolidate his reputation as a scholar. What did he write in this essay of 1973? He underlines the need to understand, to grasp the different motivations that lead migrants to find a new place to live, and more importantly, taking distance from other relevant scholars. Kunz sees the need to make a distinction between two different categories of migrants. The first one can be identified in those who are pushed out their countries. They are forced to leave their countries because their origin countries is in very difficult situations, and their lives are threatened, are put at risk because of war, persecutions, and ideological impositions that force people to leave their countries, that push them to leave their countries. They are forced to leave. So this is a first category of migrants, according to him. And it is important also to make a further distinction. A second category are called pulled migrants. They are attracted migrants. They see in migration better life conditions in economic terms. Such a classification proposed by Keynes that has become famous in the sociological and demographic debate is known as the push and pull theory, that creates a distinction between these two different countries as a conceptual basis of the migration phenomenon. But at this point, it is necessary to make a few distinctions. In the essay of 1973, he introduces this distinction for mere purpose of classification and description, without allowing or giving any other sort of value to this distinction. Yet he had to acknowledge, he had to admit that the situation could be overthrown and push term could be used for those who seek for better economic condition, in that they tend to escape underdevelopment conditions that are dangerous for their survival. They are distinguished from pulled, those who are attracted by the possibility to escape persecution and war and conflicts. So again, it is important to stress a specific point here, that the distinction introduced in the first place by Keynes does not describe objective conditions, but it works more as a descriptive scheme to produce a classification that are still discretional, if not arbitrary. So, in other words, there are not in nature two different migrant species that can be classified on the basis of intrinsic features, but the two criteria to classify them that are as such subjective and that that are reversible, consider the economic migrants are pushed and the asylum seekers are spooled. But such a distinction that originally had a sort of a purpose of classification through the hotspot approach approved back in 2015 has become the discriminatory criterion through which we consolidate a distinction that allows to accept some and reject others, simulating an objectivity of scientific distinction that does not exist concretely. The distinction that it is introduced enables to attribute economic migrants a lack of righteousness to migration through the consolidation of a classification to which we attribute an ethical value in a non-legitimate way, through which the economic migrants become clandestines and asylum seekers can, and as we will see, they don't necessarily have to be accepted. Let's try and verify how reliable this classification is. So it was shown that, generally speaking, in most of cases, there is never one factor only that is the reason why migrants leave their countries, but rather a combination of several factors that are never of economic nature only. So the fact that we only have two categories of migrants cut out a very high number and a big set of motivations that are also at the basis of migration. So on the one hand, there is the rhetoric of push and pull that leads to a very simplified scheme and concrete behaviors that could never be labeled in a univocal way, in one way or the other. And on the other hand, in this way, a large number of migrants are left out. Those who are pushed by not strictly political needs and not strictly economic needs, but by a combination of different factors. But there's more to it. And so this is even more important because migrants who want to reclaim their asylum right do not have such a condition, such a status, but they get it after the application of some criteria that are different across different countries and also change over time. And why one might argue that asylum is not a status that you possess, that you are entitled to have, but is more of a privilege conceded, granted by the state. It is true that in common language we talk about right to asylum as if we talk about a prerogative that belongs to some who live in certain conditions. But it is also true that those conditions are conditions necessary but not sufficient to obtaining the acknowledgement of the status of refugees, because the state decides whether the status is acknowledged, is granted or not. And now I will give you a more concrete example that I think will be quite helpful for you to better understand. During 2007, 18,559 Iraqi people asked for asylum in Sweden. Well, only 82% of these 80,559 Iraqis was recognized the right to stay, the right of asylum. At the same time, during the same period, 5,474 Iraqis asked asylum in Greece. Out of these people, 0% was given such a right. A paradoxical phenomenon took place, since some migrants were given the right of asylum in Sweden and were denied such a right in France or Italy, which confirms the fact that the same person could be eligible for asylum in Sweden, but not in Italy or France, because it's considered an economic migrant in those countries. Again, another interesting phenomenon, and quite a significant one, took place, which confirms again the arbitrariness of the regulation that we have in the Dublin Treaty, the Dublin III Treaty, approved back in 2015, the phenomenon of asylum shopping, by which the same migrant furthers his application for asylum across to different countries, and then chooses among those who recognize him as eligible, and he uses this right and complicates his own reception. But let's better have a look at how we can make a functional distinction of these two different categories. It is self-evident that no juridical concept can be recognized in a legitimate way to better explain this distinction, and the binomy of push and pull is completely in a very useless way, is put at the basis of very discretional behaviors of different countries, which use such a distinction only to use in a very arbitrary way the prerogative of accepting or no some migrants. But here there is a further aspect that we need to mention here, but that would deserve to be treated more in depth. If we define migrants as people who are looking for better life conditions, economic migrants, if we define them so, not only do we reserve the possibility of rejecting them, but if you think about it, we put in action a stigma in a moral sense. So there is a sort of moral condemnation in defining as economic a migrant, because you, in so doing, you claim that his motivation for living in his country is looking for better economic conditions, as if we could go over the attempt of surviving in an economic sense. But such a moralistic condemnation comes from spokespeople of a Western society that is built on the mythology, on the myth of money, on the myth of richness, that is now considered as one of our most important values, building a system of beliefs based on economic values that deny migrants the possibility to look for better life conditions. So, what can we say in a nutshell? After this outline, we can draw some conclusions that you can definitely understand by yourselves. The attempt ongoing in different European countries in order to legitimize the distinction, the push and pull distinction, is actually not justified at all, not only ethically, but also scientifically and juridically. And it's only an attempt to legitimize a variety of behaviors that took place in an arbitrary way. And I rapidly move to the third part of this speech.
A further clarification could result from a deeper analysis that is very often missing in the analysis of the migration phenomenon. Actually, some presentations in this meeting have also missed the main concept that needed to be presented. After presenting the economic reasons for a certain number of economic migrants, we need to ask ourselves, how can we more specifically determine the reasons that push people to try to find a different possibility to survive? Or to say it with different words and make it more explicit, let's ask ourselves, what is the economic situation these people are fleeing from when they decide to start their journey through the Mediterranean, or when they decide to follow the Balkan route? What are the reasons that push these people to make such a hard decision, what pushes these people to make such a decision that makes them, that puts them in a situation of difficulty, of risk? it is very important to highlight that the majority of reports and studies on the migration phenomena does not consider and does not put together two aspects which, in my opinion, depend on one another. On the one hand, we have the phenomenon of economic migrants, and at the same time, there needs to be an analysis of the main macroeconomic data related to the countries of origin. Therefore, these data cannot be taken separately if we want to truly understand the phenomenon. So in a very brief way, and trying to summarize what I have read, I will now try to explain to you the outline of the economic situations of the countries of origin of these migrants. Very often we tend to say that these migrants come from certain geographic areas, and we do not understand that we truly need to explain in detail the economic situations these migrants are fleeing from. Overall, what I want to explain to you and present to you is a result of official data coming from institutions and organizations. Most data come from the United Nations. Most of the data that I'm going to refer to is shared with us by FAO, that is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, in charge of trying to ensure that the levels of nutrition in the world can improve, and also in charge of improving the life of the populations living in rural areas. FAO also tries to contribute to the economic growth of the world. As you will see, these are very specific data, and I'm going to present them to you without any comments for the time being. So there are about 7 billion people living on the planet, and 4/5 of these 7 billion people have 1/5 of the overall resources. Differently, 1/5 of the world population has access to 4/5 of the world resources. When talking about resources, I am referring to food, energy, as well as economic and monetary resources. Now, second numbers I want to present to you. 1,200,000,000 people try to survive every day. They try to survive only having access to $1 per day. This means that about 1/5 of the world population tries to survive day after day simply by relying on $1 per day. There are over 300,000 people who die every week. These deaths are caused by absolute poverty. 1 in 6 people, that means over 1 billion people, do not have access to drinking water. This leads to health consequences and food consequences. And I think it is easy to understand such consequences without having access to drinking water. Moreover, something else that I find that cannot be accepted is that every year, 11 million children under the age of 5 die. They die because of a lack of nutrition or a complete absence of nutrition. half of these 11 million children die due to diseases that could be cured. And even more, every minute, one woman dies giving birth. 99% of these deaths occur in developing countries. Such developing countries are exactly the countries where these economic migrants come from. The highest death rates are in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Central Asia.
La principale responsabile della fame sul nostro pianeta.
Now, let's remember that the main cause of hunger in our planet is the unequal distribution of resources.
Una distribuzione inuguale che tende a crescere.
Such unequal distribution tends to increase more and more over the years. What I mean is that the rich become more and more rich, and the poor are becoming more and more poor.
Tre esempi concreti per far capire questa così stridente disuguaglianza.
Now, let me give you three very concrete examples to help you understand this lack of equality. Bill Gates' economics fortune is equal to the income of 106 million poor Americans. So, what Bill Gates earns corresponds to what 106 million citizens in America earn. Of course, these are the poorest people in America. And another example, the income earned by the first 20 taxpayers in the United States is higher than the GDP in many African countries put together. So once again, we see that the income of one person is higher than the wealth of entire countries. And now a third example, very concrete example. When Pope Francis visited the Central African Republic just a few years ago, newspapers published in two different sections of their newspapers different news that should actually be put together. So the first news that they published was that Mark Zuckerberg, the person who invented Facebook, decided to celebrate the birth of his first child, and for this reason, he decided to donate almost all of his patrimony, and he decided to donate it for those who were in need. So this made it possible for us to understand the entity of Zuckerberg's patrimony. This was equal to $45 billion. Now, at the same time, newspapers on that same day were reporting on the GDP of the Central African Republic. Now, the GDP for the Central African Republic was equal to $5 billion per year. So we see that the GDP of one state was 10 times lower than the wealth of a single person. This is a terrifying imbalance in the production system. This imbalance is confirmed by a data that is very often ignored, but that I consider to be pivotal. I am now referring to the exponential growth of the number of people who die in industrialized countries caused by overnutrition. There is an ever-increasing number of people living in Europe or in North America who die because they eat too much food. So, on the one hand, we have poor people in the third world dying because of diseases linked to the lack of possibility of cultivating the land, lack of access to grain and cereal. And on the other hand, we have an ever-increasing number of people who die prematurely because they are overweight. There are 300,000 American people who die every year because of diseases linked to obesity. And more in general, it is estimated that 71% of the American adult population is overweight. 52% of German people are overweight. And more generally, the adult population in Europe between the age of 35 and 65 weighs more than they should. So this means that every year there are 20 million people in the rest of the world who are dying because of hunger. And at the same time, there is an increasing number of inhabitants in the more developed countries who die because they eat too much, because they're overweight. FAO data shows us that the 1% of the world population who is rich has a patrimony that is overall equal to the patrimony available to 99% of the poor world population. And now, to start heading to my conclusions, let me share with you a very important information. And that is that it has been estimated that our planet should be able to produce 2,000 calories per day for 12 billion people. So this means that we should have the food necessary for almost half of the world population. Therefore, we understand that people suffer because of hunger, not because of a lack of resources, but because of an unbalanced distribution of such resources. And again, the rich become more and more rich, and the poor become more and more poor. Now, there's one last aspect I would like to present to you. Very often, this data is not considered when analyzing the phenomenon of the so-called economic migrants. So, as long as the relationship between poor and rich countries remains the same or similar as the relationship that we just presented, it will be inevitable to hope that the migration phenomenon can grow. So, to say it with different words, if Europe and North America, and in general we could also include China and India, so if these countries continue exploiting resources, if these countries keep taking advantage of the least developed countries, then the migration phenomena will inevitably keep being present. With this being said, we understand that the future is really concerning. But there is one more thing that we should add.
La persistenza di uno scenario generale in cui singoli individui
The presence of a general scenario in which single individuals are richer than entire countries
non solo pone le premesse dalle
not only lays the foundation for war,
ma configura in se stessa una situazione di guerra.
but at the same time it also creates a war situation. I would not know how else to explain such a situation that leads to the death of children, of people who die because of hunger every day, or women who die giving birth. Hundreds of thousands of women die giving birth.
La guerra sia solo giunta a lambire I confini dell'Europa non dovrebbe farci dimenticare.
The fact that war so far is mainly focused on trying to conquer European borders should not push us to forget that as long as there are these situations of a lack of balance, not only will we keep seeing the presence of migration, but we should also expect wars, conflicts, and at the same time we should expect the presence of terrorism. There are people in need, people who are desperate. Now, if these desperate people were to face themselves with walls, with barbed wire, instead of finding the policies of reception, then sooner or later, these same people could turn into something that will look like an army ready to pretend and expect with strength what they have been denied when they requested help.
La fondatezza del monito del segretario generale della FAO.
FAO Secretary General said that if you want peace tomorrow, you need to work for justice today. Now, to head to my conclusions, from the brief analysis that I tried to present to you, it is clear that there is a link between different phenomena. In particular, we see that there is a relationship between an unequal distribution of resources, the growth of migration flows, and the danger of a possible escalation of wars and conflict situations. This leads to a consequence that should be logically clear, pretty easy to understand, and that is that it will not be possible to have long-lasting peace without a more equal distribution of resources. At the same time, we will not be able to get rid of the risk of entire populations deciding to flee their country if we are not able to create a more equal distribution between the wealth of few and the poor condition of many. And now, to really wrap up, we need a new economic international order. We need a government in charge of migration phenomena. We need to have an understanding of conflict situations. These are all things that have to do with the same problem, and therefore it is necessary to come up with concrete proposals that can present long-lasting solutions.
migrazione da un lato.
On the one hand, we have the problem of migration. On the other hand, we have the problem of terrorism. Nowadays, with these two problems, Europe seems to have lost sight of the path that will lead to political unity. Today, more than ever, Europe is exposed to the risk of a possible and inevitable fall.
Ma per chiudere, come scriveva un grande poeta,
And just like a great poet wrote once, where there is a presence of danger, in that same place, there is also what will be able to save us. So this is what I hope.
Allora, Umberto, cosa dire?
Well, Umberto, what can I say?
In maniera un sistema, questa analisi economica.
You really presented this economic, historical analysis. You presented the analysis of a world system, a system that is missing in some aspects. So we need to start from ethics. There is a problem of justice.
Se non c'è una ripresa etica, se non c'è un risveglio etico.
So if there is no ethics, there can be no economic growth, there can be no political growth.
Se vuoi la pace, domani la giustizia.
If you want peace tomorrow, you need to work for justice today. Yes, this is true. The situation is very concerning. Europe is not doing very well. We were saying this earlier. Very often we tend to simplify the situation. We tend to use a rhetorical language in Europe. We tend to build walls. We put up barbed wires. So now, more than ever, we need to start with young people, with education. The journalists who spoke before were saying that it is necessary to start from a lived experience, we need to start from reality to be able to overcome the rhetoric. What we're missing now is a rigorous knowledge, and I think that your speech today helps us understand that, of course, everything is very important, everything is very beautiful, but in the end, if we're not able to put things into perspective, if we're not able to truly understand what is happening, without knowledge, without historical knowledge, we will not be able to move forward. I think we can say it is a problem of knowledge and of ethics. So now I would like to ask a question. I would like to ask you to please give us a philosophical reflection on the other, on the foreigner seen as a danger, but at the same time seen as a gift. So if you could tell us a bit about this. Thank you. This is something that I've seen and that I've heard everyone talk about, both in the event that was organized in the city of Pesaro, but also now here in Madrid. Let me say that those who spoke before me were very clear in stating that the other and the relationship with the other not only is not a danger, it is not a threat for our identity. The other is not a threatening presence that can scare us away. The other is fundamental, is pivotal to be able to establish our own identity. So now, mainly reaching out to the students who are following us today, I would like to say that if we want to be able to define our own identity, then we can do so only by understanding the relationship with the other. The other is the one who really gives us a specific identity. So it is exactly in the vital relationship with the other that we can truly express ourselves, that we can express our own qualities, our own potentials. I would therefore suggest to the youngest to read everything from Estagi, a great philosopher from the second half of the 20th century. This philosopher spoke about the problem of the other, of the foreigner. So you should read everything by Jacques Derrida, a great thinker, a man who lived firsthand the experience of being seen as other, as foreigner. Just think that Jacques was born in Algeria from a Jewish family. He was born in 1943, and then he was expelled from his school in Algeria. The reason why he was rejected from his school is that the France, occupied by the Nazi, imposed the mandate to reject the Jewish people from schools. So after living such a traumatic experience, he reached the France homeland to be able to carry out his university studies. That is where he was discriminated against because he was from Algeria. So Derrida lived two experiences of rejection. I think that probably for this reason, he is the author that better than anyone else, together also with Emanuele Liminassi, has been able to present the relationship between myself and the other, between identity and difference. He has been able to present the statue of the foreigner, of the other. Something very important, as he highlighted, is that it is always necessary to differentiate between hospitality and reception. The reason why such difference is fundamental is that being able to host others should not depend on anything else. Our behavior should be that of always being ready for hospitality. Hospitality seen as a fundamental link with the other. Differently, when talking about reception, this is a historical form that has been determined in time and that can also be limited to some historical circumstances. So we should remember this difference between hospitality and reception. And most importantly, we should call out to the young people and make sure that everyone remembers that being ready for hospitality should be the guiding criteria for everyone's life, should be our guiding criteria for our relationship with the other. Being prone to hospitality means being ready to open ourselves to the relationship with the other, to the relationship with those who are not like us. This is something that should be with us all the time. Whether the other is our father, our son, someone who is a man if we're women, or women if we're men. The other may simply be the person we study with, the person we play with. We always have a relationship with the other. We always have a relationship with someone else. And this relationship must always be guided by being ready for hospitality, by finding some space inside of us to be able to start this vital relationship with the other. So we need to leave room for the other. And with these words, we can wrap up this intervention, and we want to thank you for being here with us today. Thank you.
Allora, siamo arrivati alla fine dei lavori di questa mattina.
E prima di andare verso il pranzo, Giovanni ci darà.
So we're at the end of the session. Before going to lunch, we will now give some information. But first, a round of applause for the organizers from the Comitato. Here we have Tareke. Before thanking all schools from Spain and Italy, I want to thank all those who are connected remotely. I wouldn't steal much time to the break and the lunch, but I just want to thank the students connected all over Italy and from Europe, from 15 regions and from 10 different European countries. They won't be with us in the afternoon, but we will continue. And thanks for those who will be with us. We will come to see you in your own schools all across Europe. We'll see very, very soon. Have a good lunch now. So thanks to all of you. Close the live streaming with the schools. And now let's give it to Gianfranco for some technical information. So now we will have a 2-hour 30 break. And we will have the students coming from outside that will be helped by our students. We will eat at the cafe, and upstairs the students will eat. Our Bachelorado students can eat at the canteen. If you want, you can eat out or go home. We will start there.